Hello everyone and welcome back to Searching the Sacred. This is season 11 and episode 7. We're wrapping up our Advent series where we've been asking the question, what's in a name? And we've looked at some different names of people involved in the birth narrative of Jesus from the book of Luke. Primarily chapter 1 and then most recently into chapter 2. Last week we took a look at Simeon, and I think, personally, we ended in a really beautiful place, connecting Simeon's kind of birth name and potential parentage from his mother and how that name could bring comfort, and how his words to Mary maybe took on a little bit of a different flair. So if you did not get to the end of episode 6, I highly recommend that you dive into there. And then this week we are going to be looking at our last name. There are some unnamed people, like we didn't talk about the shepherds, but there are some named people. And the last one that we have named is...
To events from 10 a.m.
Goodness. Stupid.
You got some events, Jason.
I don't know what is going on. I didn't say Siri. Why? Don't watch. Anyway, we're going to keep this in for YouTube, but we'll cut this out for the podcast. So the last name we are going to look at is the name Anna, and it comes from Luke chapter 2, and we're going to start with, I think, verse 36.
Yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to read from the First Nations versions again, just because it kind of, although I don't know how many times we actually read it in the regular translation, so you might want to peek at both. But I'll read from that. Starting at verse 36, going through 39. As they pondered his words, a holy woman named Woman of Goodwill, Anna, welcomed them. She was an elder from the tribe of Walks and with a glad heart, which is Asher, and the daughter of Face of Creator, Phanuel. She had married at a young age and lived with her husband for 7 winters, but had been a widow for 84 winters. She served the Great Spirit at his sacred lodge night and day with fasting and many prayers. When she saw the child, she gave thanks to Creator and began telling about the child to all who were waiting for Creator to fulfill the promises he made to the sacred village of peace, which is Jerusalem. After they performed all the ceremonies that Creator's law required, they returned to Circle of Nations, Galilee, to their home in the seed planter village, Nazareth.
Okay. I do kind of feel like we should hear it in a regular translation too.
You know, it's really different.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to read it?
Go for it. You already have it up.
Mm-hmm. And there was one Anna, a prophetess, the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Asher. She was of a great age and had lived with a husband 7 years from her virginity. And she was a widow of about 84 years. Sorry, King James. And departed not from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers night and day. And she, coming in that instant, gave thanks likewise unto the Lord, and spoke of him to all them that looked for the redemption in Jerusalem. And when they had performed all these things according to the law of the Lord, they returned unto Galilee, to their own city, Nazareth.
It's very interesting, like the things that you pick up between the two translations.
Mm-hmm. Which are? What
are do it.
Well, like noticing that virgin is mentioned in
the King James
translation. Well, not Steph's, but King James. Like that felt like a very that did not happen in the Indigenous translation. And then also prophetess appears in the King James Version, and in the other one, it just said like it was an elder, which could still be elevated, but it's just there's some interesting translation things happening in this section. Do you notice? What did you notice, Jason?
I was really, I always loved how the First Nations translation translates the names. It doesn't just read the name. And so I was really struck by a lot of the different naming. I also I was like, oh, Galilee and Nazareth. Like, you don't always hear them spoken of favorably later on in the New Testament. Like, there's stuff like, nothing good comes from there. Like, how could Jesus come from there, kind of thing. And so to hear it framed like, circle of nations, or like, this place
Seed
where the
planted
seeds are,
village.
yeah, like it was
Yeah.
really, I thought that was really interesting. Um, yeah, I'm really excited to dive into this. I thought it was really interesting, the age, right? So it's one thing to hear seven, 7 years and then 84 without her husband. It was also interesting to hear 4 score and 4 or something. I was like, oh my gosh, Abe Lincoln, thanks for being here. Like, dear goodness.
Hmm.
That's what happens when I have the King James in front of me. Like, I'll just say that.
So,
That is
yeah,
84 years old, if anybody's
yeah,
interested.
84. Yeah, that was good. Which I think that struck me like, whoa, okay, how old is she? That she was married for 7 years, has been widowed for 84. So that's clearly 91, but that's when she was married, which obviously she could have gotten married at a very young age. Like, we're talking
Oh,
like,
her age is 84. She's a widow of 4 score and 4 years, so she's 84 years old. That's naming her age, I believe. So she's been widowed then for 70.
It's interesting though, because the First Nations does say like she had been a widow for 84 winters.
Okay.
So like, I mean,
the NRSV says, then as a widow to the age of 84. So it does seem to think that she
yeah.
was 84 years old. So, I mean, either way, I think it's pretty clear that she was married for a very short amount of time and then has been a widow for a very long period of time because she got married early in her life.
It does say something though about the tracking of years, that like it's as important to track the years that she was married as also the amount of time that she was not.
Mm.
Like, we're tracking both, and there's this distinction in there of
Mhm.
what her life has been like in both.
Well, especially because the distinction is that since she has been widowed, she hasn't left the temple, that she chose to dedicate her life to the service of God at the temple, which is saying something because she's not a priest. Like, she's named a prophetess, or an elder, and depending on the translations, but she's from the tribe of Asher. And one of the reasons that would be significant in this moment is she's not from the tribe of Levi. So she has no birthright pulling her to the temple. She has no priestly status. She's just choosing it.
Mm.
She is, okay, I'm widowed. I'm gonna just hang out at the temple. I'm gonna fast, I'm gonna pray, I'm gonna prophesy. So I'm gonna spend my life.
Hmm.
Which means she can't do any of the duties of the temple. She's like, I don't know, I kind of want to label mystic to her, right? It's some version of like desert fathers and mothers, but she's choosing the temple as her place because she's fasting and praying.
I feel like if we think about our church experiences, we know the people who actually aren't on staff, don't have to be doing anything, but they end up being like backbones of
Mhm.
support and care for anyone who comes there. Like, they are the
Mhm.
ones that are, um, they know the people,
Mhm.
they know how to get you to the right people, they know where things are,
Mhm.
and they
Mhm.
just know how to do things.
Yeah.
um, I feel like although there's something, the naming of her as a prophetess though does shift her role for me a little bit. It
Mhm.
changes it
Yeah.
to like, not just, it's not like she's at the welcome desk greeting people. There's like, she's in the trenches of something.
Right.
Mhm. And it's only prophetess is only used twice in the entire New Testament. Here about Anna, and then once in the book of Revelation. It's not a label thrown around.
Hmm.
Probably why there's not very many sermons about it. It's just not scattered throughout. But it does beg the question though of why we aren't talking about the person who is called a prophetess in the New Testament.
Mhm.
Yeah. That is an interesting question of why haven't we highlighted this person when they are a very unique person? Partly because, I mean, what does she have to do, right? I mean, like we can midrash around like her life,
Mhm.
but also like I'm curious to dive into okay, but what did she do in this moment with Jesus? And maybe because on the surface there seems to be a lack of significance. It's kind of like, well, and also this prophetess Anna was there, and like
Mhm.
she, she was there. Like, okay,
Well,
what, like, let's talk about what she did, like, and why that might be significant.
I am going to pull on Amy Jill Levine has a great book called Light of the World: A Beginner's Guide to Advent. And she has a little section on Anna the prophet, who she calls Anna the prophet in here. But she named in here, um, I'm gonna read a little paragraph of hers because I don't think I would have caught this. We hear Simeon's words, but we do not hear Anna's. Others, however, do, because she began to praise God and speak about Jesus to everyone who is looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. She's like the shepherds who told others about what they had experienced. She
Mm,
anticipates other women who will proclaim the gospel to all who will listen. Her focus is on concerns shared to this day for those of us who still pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
mm,
But I'm thinking about that idea that she is a prophetess and her words are for the people.
mhm,
They're not here because she's using her words to now leave the temple that she has stayed in and go tell everybody, and how that would also make her like a first apostle.
mm,
Right? She's having this experience of Jesus. So Simeon seems to have this experience where he wants to share his words with the family, and he's someone who's bearing witness.
yeah,
She's leaving and bearing witness out
mm,
the way the shepherds did, but she's also then being given the label prophetess and going out. And so that, to me, that makes her like in the line of Isaiah, or, like, I'm going out with my words. I'm
mm,
sharing with others.
But it's also like it's not like she's got this, it's like the people who are seeking something are the people that she's prophesying to. It's not like blowhorn on the corner.
Mhm.
She's not sent out. She's not going to all the different spots. She's
Mhm.
actually at the temple when people are looking for redemption.
Mhm.
well, and I think there's two interesting places to kind of pause and like reflect it for a second too, because a prophet, if we use the kind of Walter Brueggemann concept of someone who names the reality of the situation, and then also, and that reality can be fairly critical, right? Like a critical realism of the current situation. Like you're going to be honest about what's really happening, and you're also going to couple that with being hopeful about what God is still up to. That even when it looks dark and dreary, because realistically and for all practicality, it's not going well, but God is still at work. So if that is part of what she's doing, now we don't know, right? We just get this label, and I'm attaching Brueggemann's definition of what the prophets are doing. But then we also have the temple, right? Like that's where she is. So what is going on at the temple that it is maybe needed for a prophet to be there? And we talked about, okay, she's not the welcome desk pointing people in the right direction, but is she maybe like antagonistic to what they're doing? Like if she's a prophet, maybe she's there to say, you might not find your solution in there, but like I just saw the redemption of Israel. Maybe she is combating a narrative or a system um in that place.
Yeah, like maybe part of her ability to see is connected to what she sees there, like that she's not so on the inside of things that she's missing what the temple's getting wrong, because
Mm-hmm.
the prophets are often talking to kings and priests about what they're getting wrong.
Yep.
um and so maybe she has seen some things going wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and now she sees something going right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all right, we're going to talk about both. So
Mm-hmm.
we're going to bring forward to the people a new idea of how this is going to happen.
Yeah. Well, and if she is in that line of prophets and she is maybe stirring up a little trouble, or she's speaking a narrative of honesty that makes people uncomfortable, it's fascinating that at the very beginning of Jesus's life, we have someone doing that and recognizing who he is. And then you fast forward to his last week before the cross, and what's he going to do but go to the temple and literally upset the system going on there, in that same place where there was already a prophet potentially doing the same thing for like 80 years or however long she had been there. So in a way, it's there's like a Jesus isn't the first one,
Mhm.
which I think has kind of been part of our narrative with 40 Orchards, or at least the podcast here, is saying yes, Jesus is amazing, and like there's a whole lot we can talk about with God in flesh, but also this isn't the first part of the story. This is a continuation of what God's always been up to. Like there's a prophet doing the work, and then Jesus is going to go turn over the tables and also do the work.
Last week I was in a group where we looked at Mary again, and but had a different. It was a good reminder of like we talk about this. Every scripture circle is different because there's different people in it, so different things come forward. So that particular group talked about Mary and talked about Mary's words in the Magnificat, and one of the things that came up was the way that the Lord's Prayer is similar to the Magnificat, and we wondered if Mary taught Jesus how to pray.
That's awesome.
And like that was actually that Mary's influence is in the Lord's Prayer. And it was a little bit like nobody talks about that kind of thing.
Right.
If Jesus is human and divine, like there was some learning that happened, and that it was just even more of an expansion of Jesus wasn't the first one. Like, can we honor the people that were a part of Jesus's story and a part of the story of this people group? And how Jesus expanded that doesn't have to reduce Jesus. Like, I love thinking about Jesus as somebody who learned.
Yeah.
Because that's a part of the human experience, to learn. That doesn't reduce Jesus, that expands Jesus. I love the idea of Jesus following in the legacy of Anna when he goes back to the temple again.
Mm-hmm.
That expands Jesus to me.
Yeah. I mean,
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Keep going.
Well, one of the things that she's doing here that I think, besides prophesying, that is more unique than we would realize in a modern Christian church context, is that it's emphasizing that she's praying and fasting, because those aren't necessarily things you do at the temple. The temple isn't a church and it's not a synagogue. It's a place for sacrifice. And so it's not that you can't pray and fast or that that's never there. It's just not the central focus of the place. And so there I also see Anna following in the legacy of Hannah, who actually has the same name. So we're not necessarily hearing that it's the same name. This happens because the New Testament's written in Greek and the Old Testament's written in Hebrew, and they get transliterated. We don't always catch that it's the same name. These sound a little more similar than most. But Hannah it's from Hanan, which means grace. So Hannah's name means grace, and then the indigenous translation was talking about that differently, but it's grace. But her in 1 Samuel chapter 1, she is with Eli at in Shiloh, at the tabernacle in Shiloh, and she's not eating. And she goes into the center of things and is praying. And Eli thinks she's drunk because she's praying. Part of the reason that would confuse him is because it's not a place you pray. It's a place you offer sacrifices. And it's a place that's only supposed to be for priests. And Hannah's right in the middle of it. And so this feels like Anna also is in a place that she's not a priest, but she's right in the middle of it. She's a prophet, and she's praying and she's fasting. There's a lot of parallels to that 1 Samuel 1 story. And so she's not the first one either. I don't know what my question is with that. It's just into the legacy of what it looks like to read the New Testament, as this isn't the first in a lot of circumstances.
I'm trying to think of like what's, we've talked about that modern like what is a modern parallel to an Anna in in our context today? We talked about like some of the people that aren't on staff that help make things happen and keep the thing moving and just know all the like they embody the community in such a dynamic, beautiful way. And maybe that is a good idea of who Anna might be. And I think we can all probably picture some of those people in our, our church communities if we're a part of one. But I wonder if there's like a different person, like a different, like I don't even know what it look like. That's where I'm struggling. Like I don't know if there's a modern version of Anna that's in a church community that wouldn't just get ostracized. Because if you're there doing disciplines that are not in line with the regular rhythm of the rest of the people, and you're potentially speaking truth about the system that is happening there, like would you be would you be allowed to stay in a modern context? Like, would you be allowed to continue saying what you're saying, doing what you're doing, or would you kind of be nudged to like go find your people and to like go, there's probably a better church for you, that likes what you're doing and would jive with the way you're talking, so don't do it here. Because we got it right, or we're comfortable with what we're doing. Like, let's not paint it in a bad place. Instead of being like you're wrong, it's just like we're comfortable with what we're up to. Like we feel good about how things are going. I don't know.
Well,
I'm struggling to find like where would Anna fit?
She wouldn't. The cynical part of me is like, well, it depends on how much money she has. Then she could probably stay.
No, that's a great point. That's a great point.
Like there's this. It's an interesting tension because it would be like somebody offering sacrifices in our church to be like to make it the opposite of what we like. Somebody coming in to offer a sacrifice and everybody be like, whoa, we aren't doing that here. But also, she's been 84 years.
Yeah.
That's a long time to be doing this thing. And obviously it shifts when she meets Jesus, which is that's what this is pulling in. But she's been there for a long time. So while it might not be what's normal, it's also not something that's getting her kicked out. Because I do think that I don't know how off the wall it is because she is.
Yeah. I would say like it reminds me of Isaiah 58 and the idea of like what is really fasting, and it's about like caring for the poor. But like Isaiah talks about things like fasting and praying. So it's not like it doesn't belong at all. And especially as the story progresses from the first Hannah, it becomes more and more a part of what people do, but it's still just like it's not the center activity. So it'd be like, I can't think of a good comparison either, but maybe it would be like a fasting, or like, maybe it's like feeding the poor in the church as compared to feeding the poor outside the church or something like meaning like having like, I can't, I'm like picturing somebody, like what happens in the lobby that would be related to the things that Jesus asked people to do, but usually doesn't happen in the lobby. And how that would disrupt people if it was actually in the lobby. Even though it's something you're supposed to do.
I do. It does make me wonder a little bit. Like if I pull in like a little bit of the gendering, if I think about what it means to be a woman. Like I'm not saying like I don't know exactly how every woman would have been treated, but I don't think we have a high priest who's female ever. We like that is not something that we see. And it makes me think about like in the church spaces that I grew up in, when women like what women could do was like take care of the children. Like they were relegated to different levels or spots. That like maybe like she was a better priest than the priest. Like, but she was a woman, and she wasn't she wasn't a Levite. Like there's things, all the things that said she can't be these things, but like what she inhabits is the thing.
I like that.
And what do you do with a woman? Well, Luke writes about her and names her as she is.
Mhm. Mhm.
But like, I don't, like I, I think there are people, like some people are threatened by that and other people just disregard her. And I'm not sure which one she is.
Mhm.
Well, it makes me think of the power of, because of all those things, there'd be places she wouldn't be allowed to be.
Mhm.
And I think we can maybe assume that she didn't go to those places or she would have been kicked out. So
Yeah.
she would have been relegated to like the court of women, like something in this outside place. But that power of being an insider outsider who's not, who then in being in that place, I'm curious about what she saw and who she talked to every day.
Mhm.
Because she wasn't offering the sacrifice in the Holy of Holies. She was out where the people were and she was fasting and praying. She seems very aware of what God is doing. Like, was she doing the actual ministering to the people who were in
Mhm.
the court, waiting for their sacrifice to be offered and for the priest to come back? Was she noticing when people were crying, and like was part of this gift of prophecy that she had, that she would give a word to people who were there while they were in the process of sacrifice? And she was then
Yeah.
actually their minister as compared to their priest.
Mm. That's good. And
It
what a meaningful, what a meaningful role. And like, as you both were talking, I was thinking of some situations that I've seen in the past, and I'm not going to name specifics or anything because I don't want to demean anything. Because I think it's going to sound negative, but it can be actually very beautiful. I've been in situations that are very patriarchal and very, borderline misogynistic, right? Not borderline, just are, like that's the way that the structure is and the system is wired. And yet there's these powerful, like prophetic voices within the community that are given like literal platform on stage to sing and to pray and to speak over congregations, and they're doing it with so much like spirit, like Holy Spirit, like you can just feel this like woo, like that is truth coming out of that person right now. And yet there's no title, there's no opportunity for senior level leadership. This is as far as it goes, and yet that might be the most significant thing happening here, more so than anyone with a different title. And yet that person's not pushing for the title. They're not they're not trying to tear down the system. They're actually volunteering to be there. And they feel grateful for the opportunity they have to pray and to sing and to speak when they do. And there's a part of me that always felt like, how do you do that? How do you have that gift and yet you can't operationalize it in a formal way ever in this community, and yet you seem to be completely at peace with like that being okay. Like I don't. It's like
well, I
it's
think
just, and it was beautiful to be around. Like I don't know. Yeah, yeah.
somebody meant use this language with me once of like knowing if you are something in the realm of a prophet and a leader, knowing whether you are called to turn the Titanic or whether you are called to jump ship and speak to the people who have jumped ship, and that there are people who have that sense of calling to try to turn the tide. Like if everybody jumps ship,
Mm-hmm.
that that doesn't work. And so there are people who really do seem to be comfortable and called to stay inside of things that need to change as a part of trying to change them.
Mm-hmm.
And that I'm so grateful for people who are doing that, because that's a
Yeah.
really hard place
Yeah.
to stay.
And maybe Anna's a champion of that for people.
Mm. Somebody who stayed, but stayed prophesying inside. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing it reminds me of is the way that, like, is she the champion of us not, um, of us remembering not to give away too much of our power to the professionals?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's church contexts where I've interacted with people where they don't know certain things. And I'm like, well, why don't you ask that? But it's like they're trusting the leadership to do things. And it's not necessarily bad to trust the leadership, but it is bad or I don't know if I want to use the word bad, but there's a difference between trusting leadership and relegating your power to leadership. And there's a lot of people in religious contexts who relegate their power to leadership, who don't make the phone call themselves, who don't double check something themselves, who don't speak to something themselves because they assume that the staff is doing it well, with integrity, with fullness, with whatever. And that's not always true. And what is it to be an Anna to say, I might not have an official role here, but I will inhabit in this place what is mine to do, what is within my realm, and I will not relegate my power to the priests. They have a role, but I still have a role. I'm not like, because it frustrates me. It frustrates me when people are just staying inside of church systems and not questioning anything and not taking initiative themselves to make sure that that it's a place they want to be, that it's a place they are agreeing to. You know, does that make sense? I'm being a little bit vague because I don't want to out particular circumstances that I'm thinking of in my mind, but.
Oh, I think it is actually the dark side of systems. Like we have systems in place because we don't want to have our hands dirty or to do some of the other things. Like most people don't know all the information about prisons. I mean, that's also very protective for the system itself. We don't ask a lot. We pay a lot, but we don't ask a lot of questions about it, interestingly enough. And we're not checking, like, are you actually successful in your mission? That mission statement. Are you doing that? And we would see that in healthcare and hospitals. We would see that in education. There's a lot of places that we go hands off because there's a system in place that's supposed to do a thing. And until it intimately impacts us ourselves, like it really has to hit us for us to like get engaged. And then if there's enough people that are impacted outside of the thing or by that thing, then potentially you have change. But systems also protect themselves. So
there's a book called Adaptive Leadership, and in the very beginning of the book it's a book about systems of leadership and how you can help manage them and navigate them and lead them and whatever. And one of the central premises of the book is that there is no such thing as a broken system, which is a phrase we use all the time. There are systems, and all systems work. They just might not be working the way that you expect them to work or for who you want them to work for. So like the prison system is not a broken system. It's it feels broken to those who are unjustly affected by it, but it's not broken for those making money off of it or those who want it to be working that way. You know, I mean, the education system, the political system, the church system, like all these systems work. They just might not be working for who you think they should be working for or according to their mission statement, right? Like Lisa points out, but they're working systems. They're just fine. And they're going to keep working as long as no one does anything about them. So, yeah, I think we have to get over this. Oh, the system's broken. No, actually, it's not. You're just not liking the way it's working for who it's working for.
Well, and it's overwhelming to think about all the different systems. Like what, and it is like we have a system that's also like a safety net system that's supposed to catch people from falling out of the bottom. And does that work? And how does that work? And every single system has people attached to it and who actually need it to keep working, to keep a job, to keep a life. And like, what happens? It's the, like for me, when I talk about abolition, like people get like, ooh, it's the same question of like, well, what happens if actually all the churches went away for a minute and we like, what happens to Christianity? Like, does it fail if the churches fail? Or can it actually survive? Like, we don't talk about it very much because it's very nerve-wracking, like a little bit nervous. Like, oh my, what do we do without it? What do we do without that? But we also, you don't know until you, for lack of a better term, mess around and find out. Like that's how, like,
that's the word you're looking for.
not exactly, but also trying to keep us without the like parental warning at the front
Advisory.
to find out.
This conversation makes me wonder what happened. What is the bigger story around Anna being widowed? That we tend to, the same way we tend to reduce Mary into oh, she was just a young virgin and we miss her strength, and we were highlighting her strength in the Mary episode. Anna was a widow, but she was more than a widow, and I wonder if she encountered the problem of the systems when she was widowed, and part of her being a prophet is to stand at the temple and remind everybody that there are widows. I was forgotten, do not forget the others like me.
So remind us of just do the simple rundown of okay, first century Palestinian woman, right? Israeli, Jewish woman gets married at a young age, probably 12, 13, 14 years old, married for 7 years, gets widowed. Why is what happens here, Steph? Give us we know the 2024 version of someone whose marriage doesn't work out or a spouse passes away. We understand what happens in our context, but what happens in that context? What are the options?
I mean, widows are often listed in, Exodus 22:22 is explicitly saying you shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. So there's this do not oppress. This is a very specific do not oppress. And back in Genesis, we heard the story of Tamar as a widow, and how that one really, Tamar and Ruth both really highlight that a widow is supposed to be taken as a bride, married to somebody who's a next of kin of the person she was widowed by, in order to still have a family caring for her and in order to still have a child. And so that seems to have not happened to Anna. She didn't marry somebody else. And so was that her choice, or did somebody fail their duties? And it is unclear to me. I don't know exactly how much things had changed by the time first century comes around. There's a lot of things that potentially have changed. We're talking a period of, between that Tamar story in Genesis and this story, we're talking thousands of years. So,
yeah.
I'm not sure exactly how those two things were being lived out in the first century. This combination of the care for the widow is emphasized, and care for the neighbor as yourself, care for the stranger as yourself, care for the widow, that is emphasized. And there is this idea that a part of how you care for them is to envelop them into households. And either then they marry somebody else or they go back to their father's household. That envelopment into households doesn't seem to have happened for Anna.
Right. Yeah. She's not remarried to the brother of
not at her
husband.
Parents' house, because she's at
she's not at her parents' house. Yeah.
And so it may or may not mean she was forgotten. This might have been 100%. She's a prophet. I don't want to reduce her strength or autonomy, because she does seem to have some here. So maybe she chose this for herself and was I don't want either of those paths. I want this path. Or maybe she was overlooked in some way, and that's a part of what she's bearing witness to is don't widow. We're right here. See us.
Well, I think we aren't told. This is this place of depending on your lived experience, Anna can be a place of thinking about, also I can think about it if she's at 21, when she's also coming into some of the prime, energy towards finding career path or passion point or thing that you want. And we don't know, did she, maybe she never wanted children. The assumption that she doesn't have kids is to be careful. Maybe she did not want to remarry. Maybe she was you know what? I was married. Done. Don't want to do that anymore. I actually want to be here. This is my place. And maybe it is remind everybody who, because there is a way that she's remembered about, because she was a widow. That's a part of her story. But we're also told she's the daughter of Phanuel. That's who she's tied to. She's not the wife of someone. She is linked in the daughter realm. So maybe she actually, like, maybe her family did take her back in. Maybe that was,
Mhm.
they helped support her in the ways that they could. And, but, you know, I don't know. Is she actually does she never actually leave the temple when they say she didn't leave the temple? Or there
Mhm.
was like, or was she just there a lot? Maybe she went home to sleep and then, like, like what I'm saying, like, I don't know
Yeah.
if that really means like never left for reals or
Right.
like,
Yeah, I got people
Did
in
you have
my
a tent?
in my
look,
Right.
yeah,
yeah, I feel like there's some things where she probably left.
right.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, is this like a saying? Like, oh, I mean, I have people like, oh man, it's like you never leave this place. You're right.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I got people like that, but they're there like 3 days a week and not like every moment of every day. It just feels like every time I'm there, they're there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and there is a way that she could be choosing this path. So another place that talks about widows is the end of Deuteronomy 14. And it's talking about about that. Deuteronomy 14 is talking about bringing your sacrifices to the temple, and what you're bringing into the gates, between money and sacrifices. And then what it says together: the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, the widow that are within your gates shall come and eat and be satisfied.
Hmm.
So part of the purpose of the sacrificial system is to feed
Mm-hmm.
priests, the strangers, the fatherless, the widows, and to make sure that they have enough because they don't have a land inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's also a way, I don't know, like I kind of there I see her being like, all right, the law says you got to feed me.
Yeah. Like,
I'm coming. You're going
yeah,
to,
live up to your standard. I'm gonna be here to
right,
eat.
right.
Yeah.
There's a way of like holding the priests accountable to this food isn't just for you. This food is supposed to be for
Yeah.
the strangers and the widows and the fatherless. And I am a widow. Give me a portion of that food, please.
You could kind of hear a little bit of like almost her just mere presence there is recalibrating the temple to what it really should be, and she
Mhm.
doesn't even need to say anything by doing that. um just her presence is saying, live up to
Yeah,
your
I mean,
expectation.
when you see it being, I mean, when you put this in the context of what Jesus does later and recognize that it's already happening now, is like what has happened to the temple is there's a group of priests who have felt like, okay, the way we save Israel is to get the temple back. And so the way that we get the temple back really in its glory is through Herod, it's through taxes, it's through aligning ourselves with the empire in order to have the glorious temple that will realign the people. And that's what Jesus turns the tables over on, is the way that it had become this like money. It had clearly just become infected by the mentality of the empire as a part of you, as a part of trying to use the empire to rebuild the temple. It got infected with the way of the empire
Hmm.
and is like filled with money gouging and things.
Yeah.
Um, and that her being there is sort of challenging the system through that presence of like, that's never
Right.
what the temple was supposed to be. This was always supposed to be a place of refuge for widows and fatherless. Like,
Hmm.
sacrifices are for food, for people who need food.
Well, and you could probably say, like, as much as the temple is known as a place of sacrifice, it's probably, if it's done well, it's more known as a place of restoration and help for those in need. The sacrifices serve a larger purpose, right?
Mhm.
For the person offering the sacrifice, but then also for the community to actually be a more equitable place that cares well for the people that have, it just hasn't gone well for, right?
Yeah, I think that I think the sacrificial system is misunderstood by most Christians in terms of like the good that it was meant to do. If you bring a shalom offering, there's multiple ways that you bring some offerings really are just for God, and some offerings are just for priests. There's particular offerings that are for everybody, and one of those is a shalom offering. And so the idea of a shalom offering is, I was divided from my brother and we reconciled. We are going to come together to the temple and we are going to offer an animal in gratitude that we eat.
Mm,
As a way of saying shalom has been restored. A shalom
mm,
offering is also like, I had a really good crop this year. I'm going to offer my extras to the temple in gratitude. That's also a shalom offering. So, like, those shalom offerings are really the core ones that get offered to everybody as a way of
mhm.
spreading the shalom.
Yeah.
Like, that's part of what the sacrificial system is supposed to represent, is that spreading of shalom.
Mm,
There's real good there that got
yeah.
lost. over time. That maybe Anna, part of what she's being a prophet to is don't lose this part. This is a huge part of what this is meant to be.
Yeah.
It's not just a building.
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. So on a different track, if you'll humor me, we know that Luke is writing this gospel to someone who is not Jewish. And there's a narrative potentially in the first century, especially in the Roman Greek world, where a prophetess at a temple may have had other connotations as to what their role is, like at the temple of Athena or some, other Greek god. That I'm wondering if there's a contrasting here that Luke is offering his reader. Like, you might know a prophetess at a temple to be this thing, but here's a prophetess at our temple who is pointing the way towards the redemption of Israel. Like, and maybe juxtaposing what the reader may have understood the role of a prophet to be.
Or maybe, I mean, yes, and maybe there's a way that, I mean, can Luke just be writing it, not necessarily towards a particular group of people? Because I would assume everybody might be reading it.
Yeah, good
Like
point.
whether, like there's a way that we participate in this sometimes too. Like when we were reading the words of like Amy de Levine, we're reading somebody that was born Jewish. Like there's a way that other people can expand what we see. And so maybe Luke's writing is also expanding not only like a way for folks who are not Jewish to enter into a story and to see things differently, but also if you're Jewish, are you paying attention to like how Luke is seeing or what he's seeing, and why this woman who is a widow who's been at the temple the whole time, she is the one that recognizes that Jesus, like we got something happening, right? Like this is still baby. We're still in baby.
Yep. Yeah.
And she is like,
still 8 days old. Just got a name.
Well,
I got it.
It's a part of how the gospel writers together are messing with the narratives of like who is able to see what's happening, because it's not who would be expected. Here, it's Anna and Simeon are seeing what's happening. The shepherds saw what's happening. In the book of Matthew, who is writing to a Jewish audience, it seems, because he's really the one referencing so many of the Hebrew scriptures and what he's writing. When the Magi come, like this, there's this piece of the story, if we're really paying attention, that should make us go, what? When the Magi come and ask Herod, like where the baby would be, Herod calls all the religious leaders to explain the prophecies of where the baby would be. Those religious leaders say Bethlehem. The Magi go and the religious leaders don't. None of them go, wait a second. You guys saw a star in Persia and you came all this way and we're telling you where to go. Like, can I go with you? Like, I'm curious if something's happening here. Like, that should make us pause about what happened to the religious system that they're not seeing. The religious leaders aren't the ones seeing. It's others who are seeing, who are following, who are. And how does that happen in our modern context where the religious leaders are not the one who are seeing clearly? How often does that happen inside of systems? The leaders stop seeing clearly and it's somebody else. I also think in your question, Jason, about like if we do make it a bit of a contrast with prophets, I think about sort of the question or the invitation there for us potentially of who are we seeing as a prophet? And there I think of the indigenous translation of her being an elder. And what for some reason, what popped in my mind when you were talking is that the modern concept of influencers. And what makes somebody an influencer is if they're young and beautiful. And probably there were several
Thank you. I'm just kidding.
Well, and in that Greek context, that's part of what some of those prophets would be, who are certain kinds of prophets. So they'd be the young, beautiful ones who are the prophets. And how we do that in our modern context, we make the young, beautiful ones the people who have influence. And here, Anna, who's the older widow, is the one we should actually be paying attention to. And I wonder how that's a message that transcends time and space of who are we thinking the prophets are? Who are the ones we are letting influence our thought? And are they the one? And, in Matthew, it's the Magi who we should be paying attention to, not the religious leaders. Like, are we listening to the elders? Are we listening to the outsiders?
Yeah.
Because they've got some things they can teach us.
That's good.
Who would be a modern Anna? I mean, kind of going back to like, we can't necessarily, it's hard to picture what she's doing, but maybe we can picture what kind of person she would be.
Well, it's interesting because she's an outsider because she's from the tribe of Asher, but she's also been in or around the temple for, we're speculating, if she's around 13, 14 when she gets married, she's married for 7 years, she's 20, 21 when she's widowed, and she's 84, so she's probably been there 60 some years, maybe 84, kind of depending on the translation, how we understand it. She's been in and around this thing for a long time, so she understands the system, right? She knows who it's working for, she knows who it's not working for, she knows what it's about, she knows its mission statement, she's there to maybe recognize it, hold it accountable to that. So I think of some, like, who's someone that's in the system that's speaking against it, who's willing to name it and call it out. Like those kinds of people are they don't last long in our context, if you're going to start speaking against the system and not playing by it, but maybe she is playing within the system. Maybe she isn't speaking against it. Maybe she's saying, like, there's a beautiful thing happening here. Come be a part of it. And also, hey, look, that baby's going to change everything. Like maybe she's a both and instead of a either or, like we kind of often see either or because it's natural for us, but maybe she's a both and, like, hey, there's something magical that can happen here. And that baby's going to do it, like it's going to embody it to its fullest. Cause I love the story of Jesus turning over the tables, and we've referenced it a number of times.
I think you've referenced it a number of times.
I have. Like Steph brought it up too. I love that. I love that story. I love that story. I love it. I wear a shirt that says, "Don't stop sitting at the tables Jesus flipped." I love that idea. I love it, love it, love it. I love it that it comes right after Jesus rides in on a donkey and everyone's so excited that he's there. And the next thing he does is go, yeah, but this is all jacked up. But here's the catch that I also love. The next day, Jesus goes back to the temple and starts telling parables and stories and starts preaching and starts doing his thing at the temple. Like, we tend to think that Jesus is done with the temple, but he's actually not done with the temple. He's never done with the temple. He's there to renew the temple. And I just think that that's really powerful, that, like, there's not like a giving up. And I wonder, like, I don't think Anna's giving up on the temple. She's not there that long to say, well, I'm out now. Like, I think she's there to say, no, this thing's been beautiful all along if we just get to it. And don't hear that as an argument against abolition. I actually think abolition is a really good thing and needed in a very many circles. I'm Lisa.
Okay.
You have
no, it's okay.
No. Truly, Lisa. I think there's a lot of things that need to be gone, not so that they're gone forever sometimes, but so that they can have a chance to be renewed and resurrected in a way that actually is the intention. I'm not saying that about the prison system. I'm just saying that about, like, a lot of
here's what it's reminding me of, Jason, is like the number of people how easy it is to, like, complain about something on Facebook, but how hard it is to actually be involved in change.
Mm-hmm.
And what it is to be a person who's involved, who, for instance, runs for city council. And so, like, who works inside the prison system. Like, I'm looking at the two of you and different things you're doing, right? Where you're not just, there is a power when you are involved. And she's involved.
Mm-hmm.
That maybe broadens out some of the ways that we can learn from her to say, what is it to be there, to be a part of something, to.
Well, you have to be there to see it, right? Like the gift
Yeah.
that Anna has is she's in it.
Yeah.
She's in it.
She's in it, so she can see it. She can see Jesus coming.
Yes.
And what Jesus is bringing to the table. Even if it's just in the seed of a hope.
Yep.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
even if it's just like, I hope this is true. I'm here for this. I'm gonna put my hope there, because that feels like that's the spot. And I think that's part of it. Like, when you're inside of it, you can see when there is the potential for something to shift.
Mm-hmm.
And Anna kind of cues in that. And certainly, if she is if she is in the court of women praying, and she is this woman who's been there for 84 years, when Anna says something, she will send out a tsunami because of her impact to that community.
Yeah.
Like,
People would know who she is.
And people who don't have power pay attention to other people. Like, that's the thing. That is a community of people that actually can start to move things differently. Like, that is how shifts happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we read just verse 36 through 39, but it's all part of this this is what's happening on the 8th day at the temple, naming Jesus, getting his name. Simeon's going to give his kind of word of prophecy over Jesus, has his little private word with Mary, and then Anna's there. So there's like there's kind of this like old guard contingent of people who are holding down the story of what this thing could be, right? We don't get Simeon's lineage. We don't know he's not named a priest. He's not, so he's just a person that's been filled with the Spirit and is keeping an eye out for the Messiah. And then Anna, not a priest, not in the line of Levi or anything, and yet she's there for 60 some years or more, and they're seeing it, right? And like it's like a whole narrative happening, a whole thing is happening with these two. And I wonder if part of what she starts to hear with Simeon is also part of like a sign to her, right? Like, does one feed into the other, or are they separate parts of the temple? They could be separate parts of the temple for all we know, right? Like, he might be on the inner side and she might be in the court of women, and man, like, who knows? Like, it's just fun to kind of think about this magic starting to happen with these two, with Simeon and Anna. And they're there to do it, right? And what that reminds me of is that if we broaden this story of like, what is all of this helping us as humans? If we feel this burden of being Christ-like and trying to bring the shalom and justice of God, essentially we're to bring Christ to the world, right? Now I know we're gonna get all weird about like what's our job and what are we bringing and all. Anyway, I get all that, but if you're not there, like Lisa's not there, like, you're there to point out where the love and the good and the just and the grace is actually happening, where the forgiveness is possible, right? Like, part of what our job as people of faith is to point out and to witness when it is happening and to say, there it is. Even in this jacked up place that we find ourselves, there it is. Like, but when you're in it, you can see it because it happens and you've been waiting for it and craving for it and looking for it. And then when it happens, it's like, that's what we're about. Like, that's the mission. That's the fulfillment. That's the thing. Like, do more of that. Like, thank you. Like, we need more of that. Like, and you're there to see it. And I love that Simeon and Anna are there to see it when it happens.
I heard something recently that we make worse decisions when we're cynical because it closes down what we see. And that.
Okay, say that again and say it differently. That was really good.
I heard recently that it's like they did a study that people make worse decisions when they're cynical. because of the way it closes down what we're able to see. And that it's sort of a little counterintuitive to the way we think about reason, because cynicism seems like it would make us more reasonable. But I wonder about, like, in these folks that we've encountered in this story, the way they are open creates a pathway for a whole different sort of decision making. They're seeing something, but it's changing some trajectories because it seems like they're not cynical. Like they might be prophets, they might be seeing some things, but there's something they're open to that is then going to really shift their trajectory, that they are open to it. And what is it for us to stay, even as we're honest, even as we're facing things or speaking against things, what is it to stay open and guard ourselves from cynicism? And through that openness, maybe encounter surprising things that could take us in directions of a hope we didn't know was there.
What does that look like? Like when you say that, like I'm trying to imagine, like I'm not sure what the underlying message is there. I feel like there's more to that statement than just a general avoid cynicism.
Well, okay, I think about many people are feeling frustrated or hopeless about 2025. And there's a way that can shut us down. And we can look inward, but there's also ways to keep our eyes open to where there is still good or there is still hope. And how might that shift our trajectory? And how might that actually be the thing that disrupts power? Like, this connects in my brain. I don't know if it'll connect outside of my brain. So, but there's a book called On Tyranny that I bought because I've seen several people recommend, like, what do you do when it feels like you're inside of a system that has gotten more tyrannical? And the number one rule listed in that book is do not obey in advance. And I think cynicism makes us obey in advance. We like predict, oh, this is going to get worse. So I'll already start behaving as if it is worse. And that shuts down some of the things that are still possible when we behave according to the thing that hasn't yet happened, that we assume the bad will happen. And I wonder what it is to stay open to the good that could still happen, and how that actually can fight tyranny, and how that actually can change a system when we stay open to. It's vague. I know it's not as concrete as
I think. Go ahead,
it feels
Lisa.
like the story is full of people who are open.
I think I can. So, like when you describe it that way, then I can see like there's a way that some of the folks that I've met who are incarcerated live in a way that keeps them. They stay out of the cynicism, although they have every right in the world to be like. They hold open that there are both guards who are good and kind and want the best for people, along with guards that are really quite horrible and treat people quite callously. And they can, they take it's almost like this resolve thing of like, well, there's nothing I can do, so I'm just going to blend into the system and work the whole thing. And that's not what happens. What they end up doing is saying like, I want to better myself. Even if I never leave here, it is worth me bettering myself. And even it doesn't make sense. Getting an education, if you're never going to leave the prison, feels like a weird option, except that actually there's some really good humans inside that are doing good things in the face of things that are really quite horrible, because they didn't just throw it in, and they didn't just go, well, everybody's horrible, this whole thing, I'm never getting out, I'm just gonna I don't know, like for me that's where that kind of blends in of like, I think it's a little dicier sometimes when I think about like people leaving church. Then I'm like, is that cynicism? Is that like self-protection? Is it right? Like it's all the things like pop into any system and then you figure out like where the cynicism lies inside of it.
Yeah, and I don't think leaving something and cynicism are synonymous.
Okay.
I would say it's about how or why we leave something for whether or not it's the cynicism that's taking hold.
Mm.
I think people can leave things and not be cynical.
Mm-hmm.
That might be a whole nother conversation for another podcast.
No, I so
cynical, but
I'm sitting in this kind of asking the question, okay, we don't want to be cynical, but we also don't want to be like put on rose-colored glasses when there's actually a shitstorm all around.
Mhm.
Haha, I did it. Now we get to put the E next to it.
Now I'm going to say it. No,
I don't know. I think you get a higher rating if you say it.
Whoa. Okay, so it's not cynicism just put on rose-colored glasses.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a space for being critical, right? I mean, like, I would imagine, like, you need to be honest about the circumstances that you find yourself in, be realistic about it, be truthful about it, and be critical of it when it's unjust, without going down the path of, well, then screw it all. Like, it's just, there's nothing good going to happen. And you just go down that cynical path where your behavior is already predetermined for you because there is no opportunity to ever see anything other than that through that lens. That's not the same as putting on rose-colored glasses. But I think there's like how people do that. Like, I'm always impressed when someone can be in a situation where they're honest about it and then they don't get cynical. Like, I get it when people just want to put on the rose-colored glasses and then be like, look, everything's great. And I'm like, nothing's great. Like, do you need me to be cynical in order for you to actually face reality? Like, sometimes I feel like I have to go over the top, in order to help reality to set in. But it's the person that like it's so impressive when someone can be critical and not fall into cynicism. Because I think that's so hard.
I was feeling like it might be helpful to define cynicism. If you're cynical, you distrust or disparage the motives of others. You show contempt for accepted standards of honesty or morality, and you have bitterly or sneeringly distrustful, contemptuous, or pessimistic. That is different than critical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think as we close, then thinking about how that connects to all of these, like we're at the end of our whole series, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we have, like, Elizabeth and Zechariah seem to still be open.
Mm-hmm.
Mary seems to be open to Joseph seems to be open. The shepherds seem to be open. Simeon seems to be open. Anna seems to be open. And I wonder about that as sort of a thread that runs through of like, how can we stay open this season to unexpected hope, to
I actually, this is super interesting. I think this might be an Enneagram trait because I'm like, I don't feel like it's staying open. I think it's staying observant.
Okay, good.
You know what I'm saying? Like I'm like, oh, I don't think it's about being open. That feels too vulnerable in lots of ways for me. But I'm like, I do think they're paying attention, and they're scanning, right? Like that. Then I'm like, oh yeah, that resonates.
I like that. Mm-hmm. I like that.
And either way, whether it's open or observant, that's not cynical. Like the idea of like the cynicism like makes you go like this. So you're not hearing and you're not paying attention. You're like here. So how to stay observant or open, whichever. Would you choose a different word, Jason? We have 3 different Enneagram types represented here. I'm saying open. Lisa's saying observant. What word would you choose?
I don't know, like ready. And I think maybe that's the peacemaker, the 9, right? I'm ready for things to be better than they are. Yeah, because when things feel chaotic, I'm ready for the calm to finally get here. I know it's coming sometime, and it might mean we have to go through a harder situation, but I'm ready for it. Like, I'm ready for shalom to come as a 9. So open, observant, and ready. Sounds like Advent to me.
Also, it sounds like why we need each other.
Ooh.
Right? Like, this is why you need community.
Dang, what a good ending to a podcast.
Look at that.
I love it.
Merry Christmas.
This has been a 40 Orchards podcast. At 40 Orchards, our mission is to create circles for all people to wrestle through biblical text so that together we can expand each other's experience of what is sacred, whole, and good. We search through the lens of sacred possibility, assuming there is more to be discovered, questioned, and applied as we listen for how God is still speaking. You can learn more about 40 Orchards and sign up for a study by going to 40, that's 40orchards.org. Our opening music is by LesFM. Our closing music is by NCR Music Vibes. Additional music is by 3 Music. Any references to books or other sources can be found in the show notes of this episode. Thank you for searching the sacred.